The next section of the Ask checklist is about credibility, which means can we believe the source of this information? Can we trust them? Are they a reliable place to go for information about this topic? So the first question for credibility is the domain of the website a .gov, .org, or .edu? So as you may know already, a .gov site is from a government agency from the US government. A .org is oftentimes a non-profit organization, which means that their main goal for existing isn't usually just making lots of money. Usually they have got another goal in mind, which is hopefully for our benefit. And then a .edu site is a school or higher education institution like a college or university. So this is a very easy one to check for. All you have to do is look at the URL and you can see that this is a .org site. So this one gets a check mark, and my justification, my evidence for this check mark is that yes, it is a .org. It's a nonprofit organization that's running this article, running this website, I should say. The next question for credibility is, can you find the author or authors of the website? And if you can, does their education and work experience make them trustworthy and dependable in this situation? So to look for the author of the website, first, you could look right under the title at the top of the article. You'll usually find the author's name written there. We don't have an author written here, but we do have somebody who's reviewed this article. And I'm going to come back to that and explain what that means in just a little bit. So if you can find the author's name right at the top, that's great. If you can't, let me show you another place where you might be able to find that. If the author isn't listed at the top, then you should check the bottom of the article itself, not the bottom of the web page, but underneath all of the text for this particular article, you'll often find the author listed again. So again, we don't have an author, so we don't know who wrote these words exactly, but instead we do have a reviewed by name. So what this means is this person here, Mary L. Gavin, MD, reviewed this information in June of 2018, and she's putting her stamp of approval on it. So while we don't know who wrote it, the next best thing is that we know that somebody reviewed it and has said that, yeah, she's willing to put her name on the line to say that this information is accurate. So that's the next best thing. So we're halfway there for this question. We didn't find an author, but we found a reviewer, which is the next best thing. Now we want to make sure that Mary's background and education is something that we should trust. Does she know what she's talking about when she's reviewing this article? So this is pretty handy because it's actually linked right in the article. So I can click right on her and it will take us to the organization that she works for, which is the Nemours Children's Health System, which is a hospital for children's health. If I click on Find a Doctor and then type in her name and wait for the internet to buffer, here we are. There's Mary right here. So I can click right on her name here and find out a little bit about her to see if we should be able to trust her when she's reviewing an article about teens and healthy eating. So first of all, we know that Mary is a medical doctor. That's what this stands for, a doctor of medicine. So right off the bat, that's a good sign, right? She works at the Division for Pediatric Weight Management, and she's in the Department of Pediatrics. So a pediatrician is a doctor that specializes in children's medicine. So again, that seems like a good thing if we're learning about how much teens should be eating. She specializes in children's health, and she also works in weight management. And it says here her specialty is actually in weight management. So when I consider, would that be a good source of information to review an article about how much food a teen should be eating? That seems like a pretty good source to review that article, don't you think? If you aren't convinced yet, here's a couple other things you might want to take a look at. Down here, it shows her areas of expertise, just general pediatrics. She also has an expertise in obesity and weight management, as we know about. It shows us where she is located. She's located at 2 different Nemours institutions around the Philadelphia area. So she really is a doctor in these 2 locations outside of Philadelphia. And there's also a handy little tab where we can kind of get to know Mary and learn a little bit about her as a person and a doctor. You're welcome to read through this information, but what I kind of want to know about is what's her education in. It says here that she earned her degree in medicine from the University of Rochester in 1989, so she's been doing this for a little while. And she's also a board certified pediatrician, which goes a long way. So let's take a look here. If I'm going to be figuring out, is this a good person to be reviewing the article? While there wasn't an author listed, it was reviewed by somebody who sure does seem to know what she's talking about. So in this situation, I would give this a check mark. Even though there's not an author, I can justify that the person who reviewed the information is an expert in that field. And if she's willing to put her name on the line, that helps me to believe that I can trust that information is correct. The next question in the credibility section is one of the toughest ones on this checklist to answer. The question is the information on the article free of agenda or bias? So we're looking for information that doesn't have an agenda or that doesn't have a really strong bias. In order to answer this question, we need to know what those 2 terms mean in this situation. So if an article has a hidden agenda or a hidden intention, it means that the author or the publisher is trying to persuade us in a certain direction without being very clear and transparent about that. If information that we come across is biased, it means that it has perhaps an unfair opinion about the situation or a prejudice or some type of a favoritism. And we want to avoid information that has a hidden agenda or a bias, a strong bias, because it's more likely that those types of stories are going to be based on somebody's opinion rather than on scientific facts. So, like I said, this is a really challenging question to answer. In order to determine whether an article that you're reading has an agenda or a bias, you will need to read it and think really carefully about what you're reading. And what you want to consider as you're reading is, does the author seem to be giving me their opinion about this topic, or do they seem to be giving me some facts about this topic? That can be pretty hard to determine. Let me try to give you an example. So this article talks about serving sizes of food. If this article had said that eating too many servings of cookies will make you fat, that seems like an accurate statement, right? But that's kind of an opinion. Just because somebody eats too many servings of cookies one day doesn't mean they're necessarily going to become overweight. So instead, let's take a look at this highlighted section here. This is an example that's more factual than opinion-based. This passage says, when it comes to foods that are high in calories, fat, or sugar, the serving size can alert you that you may be getting more than is healthy. Let's say you buy a 3-ounce bag of cookies and you eat the whole bag. If the label shows the serving size is 1 ounce, not only did you have 3 servings, you also had 3 times the listed calories as well as 3 times the sugar. So this passage isn't telling you that you should or shouldn't eat all of those cookies. It's just informing you and educating you about it so you can be sure to make the decision that's right for you. Okay, so that's a small example of some factual information. The author isn't telling you that they think you should or shouldn't eat it. They're just telling you, hey, by the way, when you eat the whole package, you're also eating 3 times the sugar, 3 times the calories, 3 times the fat. Okay? Some other things to look for as you are reading your article is, does the author seem to be giving you just one side of the story or just a small snippet of the answer, or are they giving you multiple perspectives to view the topic from? So in this article, as we know, we've talked about this previously, the author isn't saying that there's just one thing to consider when you're determining how much food to eat. So it's not just about eating enough vegetables. True, eating vegetables is good for you, but there's a lot more to consider than just eating vegetables. We also want to make sure we don't go overboard on other things. So they're giving us lots of different things to consider. Like we mentioned, portion distortion, serving sizes, reading food labels, getting a variety of foods, making sure all 5 are on your plate every meal. So it's not just one quick answer. They're giving us a pretty good information about a variety of different factors that go into consideration here. Something else you might want to consider when you're determining if there's an agenda or a bias is the information given to you based on science or from an expert opinion? Or is it just some Joe Schmo who isn't really an expert in this field? So you would look for scientific information in this article. Unfortunately, this article doesn't tell us what type of scientific research they've used to help them determine where they're getting their information from. A lot of times it will be in the paragraphs itself as it's talking about information that's researched, or I'm going to scroll to the bottom. It might be listed at the bottom under sources or references. I'll show you an example of what I mean in a little bit. But as you can see, this article doesn't tell us any scientific research that's backing up their claims. But as we do know, this was reviewed by a medical expert in this field. So that helps us to determine that it's not just anyone's opinion. It is based on some medical research that this medical professional would agree to. Another thing to help you determine if the information you're reading has a hidden agenda or is biased is to try to figure out if the website is trying to sell you something. So we'll talk about advertisements in a little bit, but I don't see any big advertisements on the page. And also throughout the article, I didn't notice any examples of the author or the website trying to sell me a product or a certain service. So for example, if I had been reading this and it said something like, you can, let me scroll down here. You can measure your food to make sure you don't go overboard on serving sizes. And here's a link to a product that we think is really great to help you measure your food. That would raise some red flags. Might mean that maybe this author owns that company, or maybe their friends own that company and they're going to get something in return for me buying that product. Also, similarly, if they were trying to sell a service, like you should only have your questions answered by going to a dietitian, and here's the name of a dietitian that you can pay to get your questions answered, that would be another red flag. As I'm going through here, I don't see any links or anything that's seeming to try to sell me anything. It's all about giving me factual information so I can make up my own mind. So as I go back here to question 3 for credibility, I want to make a couple notes about what I found. As I read the article, I saw that it was based on facts about nutrition, not somebody's opinion about nutrition or somebody's own personal experience. There were other unbiased sources that agree with the information, and I'm going to share those with you in a little bit in the videos. It didn't seem that they were trying to sell me anything. And a lot of this information was also backed up by the USDA. And in fact, within the article, they even refer to the USDA's MyPlate site, which helps me to believe that it's probably free of agenda, because the .gov site from the USDA is an example of a credible source. So I'm going to give this one a check mark because of my justification here. I wish that they had given me some scientific research to back up their claims, but I do feel like because they had the review by Dr. Gavin, that helps me feel like the information is based on science, in addition to the facts that were given rather than opinion. The next question in the credibility section is the website or the scientific research funded by reputable sources? This is another relatively tricky question to answer. The benefit of answering this question is it does help us to determine if there might be a bias present. Because, for example, let's say that we found an article that said eating fast food is perfectly healthy and um, you can eat it as frequently as you want. No big deal. It has no cause for concern. Then, after we looked into the website, we found that the website itself or the study was funded or paid for by McDonald's. If that were the case, wouldn't it make you less likely to believe that information, knowing that McDonald's probably has something to gain if we believe that their food is perfectly healthy to eat all the time? So, this is a really important question to answer, but it can be really hard to find the answer on websites. So, here are some tips that I would suggest. When you're looking at your website itself, we want to take a look at the top of the website, the top bar, any sidebars, especially on the left side, but sometimes on the right, or the very bottom of the web page, this bar at the bottom. Okay. Sometimes you'll find this information at the top, on the sides, or at the bottom. As you can see here on this website, we're probably going to be looking at the bottom. That seems to be where most of the information is. So there's a few places that you could look for this information. If there are any tabs at the top or the sides or the bottom, you want to look through those and see if they might help you to determine where the website gets their funding or where their research gets funded from. So you might be able to determine that by looking at the About Us section. You could also look at partners to see if there are any financial partners involved. Sometimes there will be a tab that says funding. Those are all good places to start. So when we go to the About Us section, this one just gives us some general information about teens' health. It doesn't go into too much depth other than to tell us that they do seem to be involved with this organization called Nemours. So it says Nemours is a nonprofit children's health system, which means a children's hospital. So I'm pretty interested in that. I'm going to click on that link to Nemours and see where it takes us. So as we saw before, we know that the children's health system is the organization itself, the hospital. And I could look through this entire site and learn a little bit about who they are. But I've already looked through this site and I wasn't able to very quickly and easily find where they get their information. Where they get their funding from. It's not right in your face. So rather than spend 30 minutes or an hour looking through this, what I would suggest is Googling it. So Google the institution or the organization. So I Googled Nemours Foundation, which is a partner of Teens Health. And I'm just going to kind of scan through the results to see if anything might be helpful for me. All right, so one thing that I can see here, and this is really the only time that I would recommend that you consider using Wikipedia. Wikipedia, as you know, is a publicly edited website. Anybody can log in and make edits to articles. So it's certainly not a credible source of information. It's not reliable, and it isn't always accurate. But in a situation like this where we just want to see some basic information about the organization, it might give us an idea of where to look. So I'm going to check out this Wikipedia page just to see if I can get started, just to give me somewhere to jump off. So it says the Nemours Foundation is a nonprofit organization in Jacksonville, Florida, created by philanthropist Alfred I. DuPont in 1936 and dedicated to improving the health of children. So, really quickly, this term philanthropist, that is a fancy word to say that this person, Alfred DuPont, was a really rich dude. He had a lot of money and he gave it away. So, to be a philanthropist means he gives it away to people or organizations that he believes in. Um, so, what happened is he set up a trust, which is a bank account essentially. And when he passed away, he said, this trust, this bank account is going to go to Nemours. And because he wanted to make sure that well after he passed away, he would be able to have an impact on improving the health of children. So in 2009, this bank account had about $4.6 billion, which is quite a bit of money. That's not a bad chunk of change. And there were some factors that he wanted to consider about where this money went. He wanted to make sure it helped people in Delaware and that generally it helped people around the country stay healthy. When I'm considering where this website gets its funding from, that would be a really important detail to note, that it is sponsored by Nemours, which is a nonprofit organization. They already have a bunch of money. Their main goal probably isn't just to get money. They've got a pretty good bank account already. So instead, they might be able to focus on their mission statement, which is to keep kids healthy. Something else that we can notice here when we look under partners, so there are some different educational partners involved with this website, including a bunch of healthcare providers, different hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices. Just take a look at how many are here. I'm just going to scan through pretty quickly. Still going. Still going. So there are a lot of these doctors' offices all around the country that partner with Kids Health and teenshealth.org. And what that means is these doctors volunteer their time to work on articles on this site, like Mary Gavin did. She volunteered her time to review some of the articles on the site to say that they were up to date and accurate. And so that's another thing that helps me believe that this website is funded by reputable sources, because these doctors are volunteering their time because they believe that it's a good organization. So for credibility 4, this one would also get a check mark because it does seem that the website itself is funded by a reputable source. It's been around for a little while. And also the fact that these doctors are partnering and volunteering their time helps us believe that the source can be trusted, that they're not just focusing on making money off of us. The last question for credibility is, are there few or no advertisements on the page? So when you look at your website, a lot of times advertisements will show up at the top of the page in banner ads or along the sides of the web page itself. The web page may sell that space to advertisers so they can try to get us interested to pay for a product or service that's maybe somewhat related to the article, but not needed. And then another place to look is at the bottom to see if you see any other banner ads. So I don't see any on this site, but the other place I want to point out to you is within the article itself. So sometimes there will be advertisements placed in between paragraphs of the article. That's especially true if you're looking at an article on your phone, you're scrolling through. And then the other place to look out for is links within the article itself. So if they're trying to sell you a product or service, they might link it right into the article to make it look like it's part of the article. So I don't see any of those types of advertisements on this site either. The only links that I see are to choosemyplate.gov, which was that other website, which is not for profit, giving us more information. Or I do see some links to articles within the Teens Health site that we might be interested in. So since we were reading about how much food we should eat, they are thinking, hey, you might be interested in these other articles here too. And you can see that there are links to articles about certain topics that we're reading about just to give us some more information, but they're not selling us anything on those links. So this one definitely gets a check mark because I don't see any advertisements on that page. So as we look over credibility, we see that all 5 of the credibility questions got a check mark and were justified with our notes.